He weighed over 700 pounds and had just collapsed in his apartment. Paramedics rushed in, but quickly realized that he was too big to fit through the doors and down the stairs. So rescue workers removed a large window from his apartment, and they reinforced the floor to make sure it wouldn't collapse. Then they carefully placed him onto a special stretcher built to hold his weight. A crane outside gently lifted the stretcher through the opening, lowering him down from the 3rd floor to the ground. He dove headfirst into the shallow end of a pool and slammed his skull against the concrete. Now, the impact caused memory loss, constant headaches, and hearing damage. Then, 4 days later, he sat down at a friend's keyboard and started playing perfectly. He had never touched a piano beforehand. Doctors said the injury damaged part of his brain, but it also woke up another hidden part, meaning it turned him into a musical genius. When you pull the trigger, a metal bar slides sideways through the gun. This bar holds bullets in a row of small chambers, and each time you shoot, the bar moves over one position, lining up the next bullet with the barrel. As the chamber aligns, it fires, then the bar moves again. But dirt and debris could easily jam the bar, causing misfires, and as the bar shifts, it throws off your aim, which is why it never caught on. His chopper hit a tree as it landed in Vietnam, flipping, crashing, and bursting into flames. And even though he fractured his ankle in the wreck, he knew the other soldiers were still trapped inside. Despite his injury, he ran into the fire again and again, dragging them out one by one before the helicopter exploded. Every man survived, and he went on to become the first Black U.S. Secretary of State. If you tried to snowboard down Mount Everest, the board would gain speed fast. You would hit jagged ice and scattered rocks, bouncing and skidding with no way to slow down. And if you somehow survived that, you would be headed toward massive cracks in the ice. But these gaps are formed by the glacier pulling itself apart, meaning they're hundreds of feet long, going deep into the ice. As you speed down the mountain, you wouldn't see it until it's too late, dropping hundreds of feet straight down into total darkness. A mirror was hung above her, with an easel mounted at her waist and shoulders. She laid flat, staring up at her own reflection and painting what she saw. You see, she was impaled by a metal handrail during a bus accident. Her spine and pelvis shattered, leaving her bedridden for months. Now, she couldn't sit up or even lift her head, but she was determined to paint. So her mother built her the special easel, and from that bed, she started painting the self-portraits that made her famous. A priest aimed his rifle at the floating man, shot 3 of his balloons, and the man began to fall. You see, he had strapped himself to over 20 weather balloons to take a photo. He began to lift off the ground, but didn't get high enough. So they added more and tied a long rope to a car. But the rope snapped, launching him over 700 feet into the sky. And that's when the priest began to chase after him, shooting at the balloons. The photographer fell from the sky, finally reaching the ground. If you were dropped on a completely empty Earth, and only one other person was dropped on the other side, how long would it take for you to find each other? Well, if you both walked around randomly for 12 hours every day, it would take around 3,000 years to get within half a mile of each other. But if mountains or forests were in the way, you could easily miss each other, meaning you could wander around for another 3,000 years before you had another chance. To increase your odds, you should leave markers pointing out your direction. And for every day of walking, you should stop and rest for 3 days. This would give you a chance to catch up to each other if you find a marker. This way, you could meet each other after only a few decades. If someone is really drunk, you put an IV in their arm, collected the blood, and then drank it. Would it be strong enough to get you drunk? Well, when someone consumes alcohol, their liver begins to break it down, and only a small amount actually stays in their bloodstream, just enough to affect their brain and body. Even if they were very intoxicated, their blood would only be about 0.2% alcohol. That's 25 times weaker than an average 5% beer. To actually feel drunk, you would need to drink over a dozen pints of their blood, and that's more than your stomach could even hold. If you drive behind a truck hauling logs, could they really fly off and smash through your windshield? Well, each log weighs thousands of pounds, more than a small car. And to keep them in place, drivers wrap them in heavy steel chains pulled tight with thousands of pounds of force. Even if the truck hits a bump, those logs barely move. And in a crash, they'll slide and shift forward in the trailer. For a log to actually launch, the chains would have to be snapped and the truck would need to hit just the right angle at high speed. But even then, most of the force would be pushed downward, not towards your car. If you dumped out a lava lamp and poured in real lava, the glass would just instantly shatter. Instead, you would need to carve the jar out of solid sapphire just to withstand the heat. And to avoid the water turning to steam, you would need to float the lava in molten glass. But since the heat would make them both glow, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. And without a heat source, the lamp would start cooling quickly, meaning in just a few minutes, your lava lamp would just be a rock in a jar. Imagine you run a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and each of these rooms has a guest staying in it. But then, one more shows up asking for a room. Now, you might think there's no space, but your hotel has infinite rooms. So you just have to ask the guest in room 1 to move to room 2. Then room 2 moves to room 3, repeating all the way to infinity. Now you have an available room for the new guest. But what happens when a bus pulls up and it has an infinite amount of passengers? You would need more than just one empty room. So to make sure you have enough space, you ask every guest already in the hotel to double their room number. The people in room 1 go to room 2, and room 2 goes to room 4, room 3 to room 6, all the way to infinity. Now all the odd number rooms are empty, 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. And since there are infinite odd numbers, you can fit every person from the bus. And this is possible because infinity isn't just big, it bends logic, making space where none should exist. If planes towed a massive bag, could they catch a cloud? Well, clouds can be over 6 miles wide, holding billions of pounds of water. And even if you had a bag big enough to hold it, it would act like a giant parachute, creating so much drag that the engines couldn't keep moving. But if the planes were powerful enough, you might be able to actually capture the cloud. However, once the vapor turned back into liquid, the weight of it would snap tow cables, crushing the planes as they fall out of the sky. She suddenly collapsed during a first date, falling unconscious to the floor. Now, her date panicked, thinking she had just died in his house. But instead of calling for help, he decided to bury her in his backyard. Days passed and her family filed her as missing, and police eventually searched his home and found the fresh grave. Her autopsy revealed that she had a diabetic episode, which sent her into a coma when she collapsed, but she wasn't dead at that point. They learned she actually died from suffocation in the grave. The man immediately confessed, but he was only charged with manslaughter. He had another head growing right on top of his own, one that could blink and smile independently. And this head was actually his twin that didn't fully separate in the womb. It would cry when he laughed and stare blankly when he slept. Now, each head was actually functioning off of their own separate brains. But when he was 4, the boy was bitten by a snake, and both heads passed away together. If you used a mile-long ruler to measure a coastline, you'll get a number that sounds about right. But if you switch to a yardstick, you'll measure in more detail, giving you a much bigger number. And if you use a 1-foot ruler, the number will grow again. This is because every time the unit of measurement shrinks, you're measuring smaller curves and details that the larger stick missed. The closer you zoom in, the more detail you see, and the more curves there are to measure, meaning the length of a coastline keeps getting longer, almost like it never ends. If you jumped off a skyscraper holding a leaf blower, could it work like a jetpack? Well, a leaf blower only pushes out 7 cubic feet of air per second, meaning you would just crash to the ground. You would need a leaf blower the size of a motorcycle, pushing out air as fast as a jet engine just to survive the fall. But even if you could hold onto it, the engine is heavier than the tube. This means it would flip you upside down, blasting you into the ground at higher speeds. The foul ball flew straight at the woman's face and instantly broke her nose. There was blood everywhere, and medics rushed to help. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, the game continued, and on the very next pitch, another foul ball flew through the air. It hit the same woman in the knee, fracturing her bone. And even though she was treated, she only watched from the left field bleachers after that. If a nuke is being dropped on your city and you try to shoot it down, some people think that would make it explode. But after piercing the armor, the bullet would have to ignite a layer of explosives that surround the core. And this is what would set off the nuclear explosion. But this layer of explosives is incredibly stable and can only be triggered by a detonator. Now, the detonator wire is only a fraction of an inch wide, meaning if the bullet cut it in half, it would actually disable the bomb, making it drop to the ground without going off. If you were shrunk down and landed on someone's nose, you'd be surrounded by these black wax-filled craters. If you slipped into one, you would fall through a tunnel of dead skin and bacteria. The walls would be slick and warm, coated in layers of oil. And while you were trying to climb out, fresh oil would start seeping in from the sides. It would rise fast, filling the space and pushing you deeper. To escape, you would need to somehow scale the walls quickly before the next surge buried you alive. He flew over the handlebars and landed chest first on a branch. It pierced 4 inches into his chest, puncturing a lung and snapping 8 ribs. But adrenaline kicked in, and he thought it was just a shoulder injury. So he stood up and walked through the woods while bleeding. And instead of calling 911, he just called his wife. Doctors later found a hole in his lung, a torn vein, and a wound 1/2 centimeter from his heart. But he somehow survived. It slithered toward her as she was washing dishes and suddenly bit her thigh. And as she screamed, the 16-foot-long python wrapped itself around her body. The 64-year-old was pinned to the floor of her kitchen, unable to move as the snake squeezed tighter with every breath she took. She screamed for help for 2 hours. Finally, a neighbor heard her cries and called the police. And when rescuers arrived, they beat the snake with a crowbar until it finally let go and slithered away. The woman survived, but the python was never captured. As he snuck onto the roof, he didn't see the glass window, which was painted to match. As soon as he stepped on it, he crashed through the glass, landing headfirst on the gym floor. You see, he climbed up there to try and steal a spotlight from the school, but the fall left him paralyzed and unable to speak. And instead of being arrested, he sued the school. They ended up paying him over $250,000, plus a monthly salary for the rest of his life, even though he was robbing them when he fell. They would throw the harpoon into the whale, causing it to suddenly panic. And as it tried to escape, it would drag the small boat behind it. Now, it could swim for miles and reach speeds of 23 miles per hour, meaning the hunters had to hold on tight. But as it dragged the boat, it got tired. And since it was losing blood, it would eventually grow weak. That's when the hunters would reel it in and slaughter it. But some whales would dive deep instead of swimming forward, drowning the whalers before they could kill it. When the riders grip their handlebars too hard, the muscles in their forearms can actually get too big, and the tissue holding them together gets pulled tight. Inside, the blood vessels are squeezed, stopping the blood from flowing and turning their arms numb. To fix this, an incision is made in their arm and the tissue holding the muscles together is cut. This releases the pressure and allows the muscles to grow while opening the blood vessels. But it leaves them all with a massive scar. He put the light bulb in his mouth for an online challenge, but once inside, the bulb got stuck behind his teeth, and he couldn't open his mouth wide enough to remove it. He went to a fire station for help, but they couldn't safely remove it without breaking the glass. At the hospital, doctors used a special tool to gently open his mouth wider. They had to dislocate one side of his jaw to create enough space. Then they slowly pulled the light bulb out without breaking it. Afterwards, they popped his jaw back in and he was able to recover. You would skin the dead baby goat, making sure to include the ears and tail. Then you would tie the fresh hide onto another baby goat whose mother had died. You see, normally, if you try to get the mother to adopt a kid, she'll know it's not hers and could trample it to death. But when you dress the orphan in her dead baby's skin, the scent fools her into thinking it's her own kid. Once she starts sniffing it, it means she has accepted it. And if she lets it drink her milk, she has adopted it as her own. They release threads of silk, which the wind catches, lifting them into the air like a balloon. It's called ballooning, and it's how spiders travel long distances. But sometimes, millions do it at the same time. In one Australian town, people looked up to see the sky full of tiny black specks. Now, they thought it was pollen or ash until it started landing on them. Millions of spiders were drifting down, carried by invisible silk parachutes that would end up covering everything. He wandered into the woods after a night of drinking and never came back. His friends panicked and called the police. A massive search party was launched. But the man was just wandering around the forest drunk, and as he saw the search party walking past, he decided to help. He trekked through the fields for hours looking for the missing man. But when they called out his name, he looked confused and told them he was here. He didn't realize he was actually looking for himself. The baseball starts with a round cork. It's coated in rubber to form the core, then tumbled in glue to coat it. Next, 1,000 feet of yarn is wrapped around the core in 3 different thicknesses, and this gives the ball its bounce. Finally, 2 figure-8 leather pieces are placed over it, and a worker uses red cotton thread to make exactly 108 stitches, binding the pieces together. The ball is rolled and pressed to tighten the stitches and smooth the surface, and each ball is tested before being sent to the field. The candle was lit and attached to the tortoise's back. Next, they would release it into a dark house and wait. If someone was home, the strange sight would make them scream, and this would warn them not to enter. But if they heard nothing, they would follow the turtle inside. The candle on its back would light their way as they ransacked the house before the thieves escaped with their treasure. She woke up with chunks of hair scattered across her pillow, and the same thing happened to almost a dozen other girls in the area. Parents nailed their windows shut and slept in their children's rooms, fearing that the phantom barber would appear. And even though police searched for him, they found nothing. But when they investigated a separate attack, they found scissors and hair in the suspect's yard. Even though he said he was innocent, he was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. A blast of electricity shoots the bullet at over 5,000 miles per hour, and it can hit a target 100 miles away. The incredible force can punch through steel, destroying an enemy ship in a split second. You see, to shoot it, electricity moves through the rails and metal holding the bullet. This creates a strong magnetic field, which pushes the bullet down the barrel at incredible speeds. But the gun uses a huge amount of power, too much for any ship to carry, which means it's trapped at the test range. Behind the cupboard, they found a staircase that led to a concealed bunker. Inside were a man and his 6 kids who had lived there for nearly a decade. They were raised in the bunker and had never gone outside. They believed the outside world was evil and would hurt them. Now, police found the bunker after the eldest child escaped and asked for help at a nearby cafe. Neighbors had no idea they were under there. The father was arrested for his crimes, and his kids were freed and slowly introduced to the outside world. He split his tongue in half with a laser, burning the flesh as it sliced through. Next, he filed his teeth into sharp points, and his entire body was tattooed with green scales, which took over 700 hours to complete. He even implanted bumps into his forehead, all without anesthetic. But the pain was so intense he vomited while having hallucinations, and his pointed teeth and split tongue made it hard to speak, meaning he had to go to therapy just to learn to talk again. If you drop a brick and a feather at the same time, the brick will hit the ground first. That's because the feather's flat shape spreads out, so it bumps into more air as it falls. It's also too light to push against the air, so it falls slowly. Now, the brick has more area for the air to press on, but it's heavy and compact, so it cuts through the air more easily and doesn't slow down much, meaning it'll fall first. But if you put them in a vacuum chamber and take away all the air, there's nothing to slow either one down. Gravity actually pulls everything down at the same time, no matter how heavy it is. So as they fall side by side, they actually hit the ground at the exact same time. After being cut off, its blood vessels and nerves were attached to the neck of a larger dog. And once everything was connected, the small dog's head and front legs were sewn onto the larger dog's back. This disturbing setup forced them to share the same blood supply, keeping them both alive. And for 3 weeks, the small dog's head could move and bark. Now, sadly, the strain was too much on their bodies, and both dogs eventually died. He aimed the shotgun at the door and attached a wire to the handle, since the empty house had been robbed before. And one night, 2 friends broke in, looking for antiques. When they entered the room, they set off the trigger, and this fired the buckshot straight at their legs, hitting one at close range and blowing part of it off. But since it's illegal to booby trap a home, the robbers sued the homeowner, and the jury decided he was right. The owner was ordered to pay $30,000 and had to sell his farmhouse just to cover the cost. If you put super glue on a wound, it will actually seal the skin shut. And you might think this is a quick way to avoid stitches, but if the cut isn't clean, dirt and bacteria can get trapped inside, leading to a serious infection. Instead, ask a doctor to clean the wound properly, and they might even use their own fast-drying glue instead of stitches. But this is a special formula, allowing it to heal without an infection. Turn the key so the first bar slides into the first hole. Then twist it until the second bar slides into the second hole. And finally, turn it again to slide the last bar inside the lock. Next, push the whole thing firmly. This slides the key around 5 metal springs, which hold the lock in place. As the key slides along them, this releases the bolt, allowing you to open the lock. And these were designed in ancient China to confuse thieves even if they had the key. He climbed up into the plane's wheel compartment, hoping to see the world. But he didn't realize the wheel compartment door would open again in the sky. You see, he had run away from home because he wanted to travel, and when his parents caught him and put him into boarding school, he ran away from there as well. He snuck into the airport before smuggling himself onto the plane, and as it took off, he thought he would finally get his wish. But as soon as the door opened again, the boy dropped out. And at that exact same moment, a man was testing out a new camera lens. He snapped this chilling photo, capturing the death of the boy and his dreams. The cougar charged at the boy in his backyard, ready to pounce. But just before it did, his dog came running. She lunged at the predator, fighting it off as the boy ran to safety. By the time police arrived, the cougar had the dog by her neck. Now, they managed to shoot it, but the dog wasn't moving. That is, until the boy stepped forward. Suddenly, she let out a deep breath, stood up, and went straight over to him. She recovered from her wounds, and for saving his life, he bought her the biggest steak he could find. The woman was tied to a wooden chair attached to a long beam, hanging over a river. Then she was slowly lowered into the water while crowds watched. You see, this device was meant to punish loud, rude women by humiliating them in front of the town. After a few seconds underwater, they would pull the lever, lifting her out, soaked and gasping for air. Then they would dunk her again and again, ensuring that she had learned her lesson. They yanked out the feathers around the chicken's butt and pressed the butthole directly onto the infected lump, strapping it on. You see, they thought it would suck out poison from the patient, and they would even seal its beak to encourage it to breathe through its butt. Once the chicken suffocated, they immediately replaced it with another one. And this method was used for centuries before people realized it didn't actually work. They cut off his middle finger after his body was dug up for reburial. You see, he had claimed that the earth revolves around the sun and was arrested by the Catholic Church for defying God. But centuries later, his discoveries were accepted as fact, and his body was being moved from an unholy grave to a Catholic tomb. His finger was preserved in glass and placed in a museum, standing as a final gesture to those who didn't believe him. The owner would beat the goat with sticks, and he did this to make it aggressive towards humans, so it would guard him. And this went on for a long time. But one day, the goat had enough. It charged forward, ramming its sharp horns straight into the man's stomach, twice. As the man stumbled away, the goat chased him onto the porch, then kicked him off. And he hit the ground hard, dying within minutes. When his body was found, the goat was captured, but instead of being put down, it was taken in by animal rescuers. They connected the blood vessels as they pushed his amputated hand into the incision on his calf. This pumped fresh blood into the hand, keeping it alive. You see, he had gotten into an accident at work, and doctors knew they had to act fast, but his arm was too damaged to reattach it right away. And if the hand didn't get blood soon, the tissue would die. So they decided to attach it to his leg while his arm healed. Then, once it was ready, the hand was still fresh, and they were able to reattach it. They jabbed the umbrella tip into the victim's leg from behind, and a hidden trigger inside the shaft released a burst of compressed air. This fired a tiny metal pellet just under the skin, which contained a deadly poison. After it entered their bloodstream, the victim's cells began to shut down, causing their organs to fail, and the assassin disappeared with the killer umbrella, leaving the person to die. He took pictures as the ash burst from the volcano, racing toward him at over 100 miles per hour. But he didn't run. You see, he knew there was no time to escape. So he kept documenting the eruption as the sky went black. When the cloud got too close, he wound the film back into its case. He packed the camera, placed it in his backpack, and lay on top of it to protect it. And 17 days later, rescuers found his body under the ash. Later, his photos were published around the world, the only ones taken so close to the eruption. They pulled pieces of the tumor through her skull and straight out of her eye socket. You see, she had a tumor wrapped around the top of her spine, but it was too risky to operate in that area. So instead, surgeons cut her lower eyelid and removed part of the bone. Then they took out a section of cheekbone, making a tunnel to the upper spine. Surgical tools and a camera were inserted. Then, piece by piece, they carefully cut away the tumor and pulled it out of her eye. Stuff the chocolate inside the marshmallow, then push the stick a little to one side. Now, if you hold it above the flames, you'll burn the marshmallow while the chocolate stays solid. Instead, wait till the fire dies down and hold it just above the glowing embers. Rotate it slowly to cook it through. Once the outside is golden and the chocolate is soft, slide it off between 2 graham crackers. And as you eat it, each bite will be perfectly melted. She stuck her arm through the cuff and pressed the button. Then it inflated with air, tightening around her arm to measure blood flow. But when it was supposed to release, the valve got stuck, trapping the air inside. The pressure stayed tight, squeezing her arm painfully and pinning her to the chair. She yelled for help, panicked, and was unable to pull free until someone finally just unplugged the machine. A soldier spotted a tortoise crawling through the mud during the battle. He picked it up and tucked it inside his pack. The tortoise stayed by his side through gunfire and trenches. They crossed battlefields together, shared food, and survived the chaos. After the war, he brought it home, and it lived in his garden for decades. The soldier died in his 80s, but the tortoise lived for 10 more years, outliving the man who saved it.
আমি তো উত্তরে চলে আসছি জসীমউদ্দিনে।
গুড মর্নিং। এভরিথিং ইজ ফাইন।
আচ্ছা শোনো, আমি
শহরে কিন্তু দুইটা রূপ, রাতের এক রূপ, দিনের আর এক রূপ।
অবশ্য কিছু মানুষের কাছে এই নিস্তব্ধতার চাইতেও টাকার প্রয়োজন বেশি।
তোমার যদি কোনো সমস্যা না থাকে তাহলে কি আজকে সারা রাত আমরা একসাথে চল না বিয়ে করি? জি আম্মা, আমরা ভালো আছি, সবকিছু ঠিকঠাক। আপনি আসলে খুশি হব।
বেঁধেছি ঘর হৃদয়ের জুড়ে।
হ্যাঁ, বলছিলাম কি যে তুমি ভবিষ্যৎ কি চিন্তা ভাবনা করছো?
মানে আমি অনেকদিন ধরে ভাবতেছিলাম যে কথাটা তোমার সাথে শেয়ার করব।
রিকোয়েস্ট করছে, এতবার বলছে, তো বাধ্য হইছি।
ফাইন ভাই,
কষ্ট যাবে কিসের গল্প ছাড়া পাবে কিসের কষ্ট।
না
বাচ্চা, এটা তো আর আমার একার ডিসিশন না। এখানে শুভ কি চাই, ওর ফিউচার পরিকল্পনা কি। লাভ ইউ, রেফার করেন।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তুমি প্যারা নিও না, হয়ে যাবে।
জি জি অবশ্যই, ঠিক আছে, ফোন দিন। হ্যাঁ,
তুমি কয়েকটা জায়গায় ইন্টারভিউ দিছো, তারাও জিজ্ঞেস করছে যে তুমি কতটা ইন্টারেস্টেড। এখন এই নিস্তব্ধতা কার না ভালো লাগে?
অনেক প্যারা দিয়ে দিচ্ছি, সরি।
আরে প্যারা নাই, এখন ঠিকঠাক ঘুম ঠিকঠাক হচ্ছে?
ভালোবাসি তোমায় অন্তর।
আচ্ছা কথা বলো,
ভিতরটা শিমুল তুলার মতো নরম হয়ে ছিল। যাওয়ার সাথে সাথে একটা
তুমি এতদিন যা করেছো তাতে আমার একটুও মন গলেনি, আর তোমাকে ভালোবাসার কোনো কারণ।
ও আপনি সে বড় ভাই? ভাই আপনার নাম তো আমি বহুত শুনছি, কিন্তু আমার
বুঝছস?
ভাই আমি এটাই বুঝলাম না, আপনি এই মাইয়া তানিয়ার মধ্যে কি পাইছেন? এলাকার সব মাইয়া আপনি।
মানুষ মাত্রই ভুল করে, তাতে কি?
ভাই এমন যে করবো।
দাঁড়া, মাথার ভিতরে অলরেডি একটা তানিয়ার বাপরে আমি চ্যালেঞ্জ করছি, 7 দিনের মধ্যে তানিয়া আমারে আমি প্রেমে ভালাবো কেমনে বেটা? কস না কেন, বেটা।
ভাই কি কমু কোন মানে হ্যারে বাড়িতে কেমনে বাইক করবে এটা তো জানি না। এর মধ্যে আপনি কবিতা দিয়ে দিচ্ছেন, আমি তো
কোন হারামজাদা আমার মায়েরা ডিস্টার্ব করে?
খালু আপনি শুধু শুধু রাগ করছেন।
আমি হইতেছি রিক্সা, তুমি হইতেছে এসি বাস।
মামা ভাড়া নিত।
আপনার ছেলের সাথে আমি আমার মেয়েকে বিয়ে দিব। ঠিক আছে ভাই স্যার।
ফুটে যাব না মানে এত হ্যান্ডসাম ফ্রেন্ডলি সুন্দর
হারজিত চিরদিন থাকবে। একটা এতিম ছেলের জন্য আজকে আমি
আমার মতো একটা মানুষকে ভালোবাসা যায়।
সত্যি বলতেছো তানিয়া?
সেলিম
আবার আসবো স্যার। আগে আপনার বাসায় আসতে গেলে পা কাঁপতো, এখন আর পা কাঁপ না।